Do you know, last weekend I ended up at a dog wedding. I have no
What?
idea. Yeah,
No,
it was
no, that's not a
crazy.
real thing.
Oh my God, it was utterly insane, Matthew. I've never seen anything like this. And it was packed, and everyone was like running around like idiots, like, oh my God, are you guys here for the wedding? We have to get a seat for the wedding. And there were like all these decorations.
So dogs were getting married?
Yeah. So I ended up, my mom and I were just going to this sort of like arts festival type of place where, a bunch of like vendors just sell things. But we get inside and like there's a dog wedding and like the dog is wearing a tux. They're supposed to like bark their vows or whatever.
What does it mean? How do dogs
I
just
know,
California weirdness?
pretty much.
Oh
Pretty much.
man.
And to be honest, I predict these dogs will be divorced within 6 months. They didn't even know each other.
I was gonna say, it sounds an awful lot like an arranged marriage. Like it sounds like a
Definitely.
very like not California style. Like if this was like a human ceremony, it would definitely not be California.
Yeah, and like they said, oh, we have a reception after with dog treats. I'm like, dog treats? There's zillions of humans here. Like we don't get a single drink or anything.
Oh, it was all dog treats?
Yeah. I'm like, where's the
Oh,
champagne?
that's
I just sat
no.
through a dog wedding.
I'm Matthew Buckley Smith, and you're listening to SLEERICKETS. Thank you all for listening. Thanks especially to all of you who've taken a moment sometime recently just to recommend the show to a friend or acquaintance. It makes a big difference, and I'm grateful. Thanks also to all of you who subscribe to The Secret Show. I've had some more subscribers recently, and some more people taking me up on my offer to put your email, go to sleerickets.substack.com, put your email address in, and I'll give you a week's access for free. There are 40, maybe 41, I can't remember if it's 41 episodes up now. The last two episodes were very, very different, but I got surprisingly positive responses to both, and some negative responses. But check it out, see what you think. I think it's pretty good. Like I think it's a pretty good little fucking podcast on its own. Certainly as an addendum to this one, as well as just some weird shit, just some stuff in there that So again, you can go to sleerickets.substack.com and find it all there. Before I introduce this week's guest, whose voice you have already heard, I had just a quick note. A couple of people had written in about previous episodes. In the last episode, I talked about The Grapes by Anthony Hecht, and I paraphrased a couple of very thoughtful listeners, quoted them, paraphrased some other people, and there was just some concern about what was being attributed to whom. For anyone who was concerned, Zara has a great admiration for Anthony Hecht and his poetry. That poem is just not her particular cup of tea, as she made very clear in her original note to me. I did not quote it in full. On a similar note, Jonathan wanted to clarify his only real objection is the last line. It's just the last line he gets hung up on. So there's that. And then also Elijah, I think, fairly wrote to say that I didn't really quite accurately represent his notion of pity when I talked to Brian. And I can't remember if this was in The Secret Show or not. But in any event, true, fair. All of you, I hope, will remember never to radically change your opinion of anyone based on hearsay from me. But also, I want you all to write in and tell me when I've gotten things wrong. I want you to write in and tell me what you think and feel comfortable doing that. So I do want to make sure, as I talked to Shane today. It was a great conversation. We had talked yesterday and today. I've got a lot of great stuff I'm going to have to edit down and put out. But as I said to him, like my goal is never to pull a gotcha. Like my goal is never to catch somebody out in saying something to me. I just would love for all of us to speak a little more frankly about poetry. So with that in mind, please do always feel free to write in and tell me what you genuinely think. And also, let's just all of us as listeners give everybody the benefit of the doubt, right? Especially if it's something that you're hearing from me that I might only vaguely remember. So, let's just give each other the benefit of the doubt. I've already said we should be assholes, but let's not be dicks, all right? Not dicks. That's too far. We can be assholes about actually speaking our mind about poetry and acknowledging that not all poems are good and some poets are full of shit. But let's not be dicks to each other. How about that? My guest this week, I've been trying to get her back here. Alexis Sears has returned. She was so much fun the first time around, and it was great meeting her in Baltimore, where we gave a reading at Hopkins a little while back. And I'm trying to recruit her to come hang out at the ALSEW conference this coming October. So we shall see. But in the meantime, she's just a great deal of fun to talk to. A really like refreshingly honest talker about poetry. We talk about a lot of stuff. We definitely get taken off track for a while, but eventually we get around to the main subject of our conversation, which is the excellent essay Owning the Masters by Marilyn Nelson. It originally appeared, I believe, in the Gettysburg Review in 1995. It's a surprisingly personal essay, and Alexis and I got sort of personal in our response to it. So I do hope you enjoy it. We talked for a long time. My guess is I'm going to have to break this up into a couple of segments, but I will get all of that out to you soon. And for now, here is at least I haven't edited it yet, as you might be able to tell, but at least a significant portion of my conversation with Alexis Sears, author of Out of Order. I'm not going to try to list all of her other accomplishments because there are too many, and some of them come up in our on mic conversation. So there's that. I will include links to her book and to her webpage. And now here is Alexis Sears. Matt Wall sent me this interview on. I had not listened to any of the Poetry Foundation's poetry podcasts in a while. And he sent me this one with, the problem is I realized, like, I was just looking up some of your news from the last, like, it's been not a year since you were here, but like, it's been a little while.
Yeah.
And I have to like offer like a blanket apology / disclaimer. Cause I'm like, oh no, like Alexis is like, has like met or like been affiliated with like lots of people that I've talked trash about. So like you're absolved of any wrongdoings associated with this podcast. But I don't want to name the poets because I don't want them to be people who you're. Well, like there were two poets talking on this podcast about like the poetic process, and it was the most California bullshit I've ever heard in my life. Like literally, like this crystal contains all the information of my ex-lover, and I swallow it every morning, and then I shit it out, and then I wash it and swallow it again, and see the thing, like what's alarming to me is like you're just like nodding with a calm, matter-of-fact expression on your face, like none of this is news to you. Like this is, I mean, it was zodiac stuff, it was vibrations, it was, and it just like I had to stop listening because I just like I think like I have a certain kind of tolerance for, maybe it's just like other like brands of nonsense, but like that style I don't know, I just I haven't developed a tolerance for it. Like I'm like Vizzini in The Princess Bride. Like I haven't built up any resistance to it.
Yeah, and I grew up in California, and I wonder how much of this whole like, oh, crystal, like good vibes, kale smoothie stuff is just like for show. Because most of my friends who grew up here are not like that either. But those people, like the crazy, stereotypical California loud people, they're the ones being loudest about all this nonsense. Like I know someone who says, oh, my writing routine, I wake up at 5:03 and then I like meditate for 3.5 hours. And then I drink my kale smoothie and then I start writing. I'm like, there's no way that's true. There is no way. They're just like rolling out of bed hungover, having a breakfast burrito, going back to bed, and then writing like 3 sentences.
I was going to say scrolling through Twitter for 3 hours. That's what they're meditating. That's what the meditation is.
Twitter is insane, by the way.
I'm out of the loops. So just fill me in on, I'm sure nothing has happened in the last 10 to 11 months on Twitter. So just give me a brief overview of whatever news you might have to offer.
Okay. Someone said Anne Frank had white privilege. I think you might have been aware of, like, that was just crazy. I was like, what are you talking about?
Well, she wasn't persecuted for being white. So in that sense, not wrong, you know. Like, oh my God. You've had like a busy stretch. You also, I just found out you won like 5.5 minutes ago, you won the Poetry by the Sea book thing.
Yeah.
So
How crazy is
what is
that?
this? What's
Um,
the I didn't know, so they have like a prize for a book published, like an already published. It's not a book prize, it's an already published book. So
yeah.
what is it exactly? It was Allison Joseph who
Yeah,
chose her.
who is
Yeah, yeah,
amazing, by the
yeah,
way.
yeah, yeah. She's terrific.
It was like, oh, it was best book of 2022. So like the whole
All
year,
right.
all the poets.
Are
Yeah.
you gonna, and Poetry by the Sea is in like a week or so?
Yeah, I wasn't planning on going because it's so hard to get there and money and this and that. But now I really want to go.
Yeah, are they, you would think that if they were going to give you a prize, they would maybe tell you, they would give you some warning. I mean,
Right.
are they like, have they said like, oh, by the way, you should come?
Yeah, it's really weird. They're like, oh yeah, congrats on the prize. If you still want to come, you can come. But the thing is, like, by the time you factor in like, flights and this and that, it's almost like I didn't even get any money at all.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
I'm
So they're
better off.
basically just giving you like a travel stipend. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's the whole fucking span of the country for you.
And I've heard
Uh,
Connecticut is amazing.
yeah. It's a whole different fancy world up there. Like it's very different than the South. And I imagine it's very different than California, but probably in a slightly different direction.
hmm Yeah,
Um,
those East Coast people are cool, most of them. Don't you think?
yeah. Well, yeah. I'm sort of like, I don't feel like an East Coaster, especially except when I listen to a podcast about swallowing crystals. And then then I
Oh
feel
my
like
God.
Woody Allen and Annie Hall, like give me some like hot dogs and smog.
You're gonna
Um,
have to text me after this to tell me who was on that podcast so I can go listen to it.
it was C.A. Conrad and Ho Un Wen.
Oh, okay.
I have not. So I, my only not, I've read a little bit of their poetry. I think I included one of her poems in my essay on nonsense poetry, but I've not read them much. I can also put in brackets if you want to tell me if you know of them or have thoughts about them. I can leave that in or out if you know
I
however you want.
actually don't think I've read any of their work.
Okay.
Can you believe that?
No, I mean I can only because there's just so many poets, but like they are two prominent enough names that like I've certainly known of them for a number of years.
hmm
But boy, it didn't it didn't inspire me afresh to go look up their work. It just seemed like
Yep.
I cannot believe these people are because he just like or they Conrad just won like a big award, and so that was why they were interviewing.
Oh my God.
Um,
Yeah, that would
um,
just make me like super turned off. I would just put them on the do not read list.
they haven't gone to the top of my reading list.
Yeah.
But I had like we've got this essay to talk about, but I just had a few other notes just looking through sort of your like recent and future soonish future activities. I did want to ask because I think last time we spoke, you were like getting ready to give the Westchester keynote.
Yeah, that was
So
great.
what? How did? And that was a virtual conference that year, or was it in person?
It was virtual.
Okay. So what did you? How did that go? What did you say? What
It
wisdom
was
did you
good.
share?
It was about, gosh, I'm trying to even remember. Oh, it was about like form and voice,
Okay.
which is like becoming a really popular thing to talk about now. I don't know. A lot of people I know have just sort of decided that they're formalists.
Okay. Well, so tell me. 'Cause this is something like I sort of follow, but I never know exactly how the where the tide is. So tell me, like you're verifiably young and hip. So what's actually going on with this stuff?
I don't really know what's happening, but all of a sudden people are just sort of like, "Oh yeah, I'm gonna write a sestina today."
Boy, why the Sestina though?
I don't know.
It's not that there aren't good ones. It's just that it's a, like it's an extra mountain you're climbing if you decide to do a Sestina. But yeah, but like this is something you just hear from more people than you would have maybe a few years ago.
Yeah, it's weird. I don't think form is something that you can just like do, right?
I mean, I certainly remember reading Lovejoy Street like right out of college and thinking like, oh, it sounds so good. Like it's so simple
Mhm.
and so pretty. And like that, it sounds so good that way. I should go ahead and do that. And then I remember trying and thinking like, oh fuck, this is fuck. This is actually really hard to do. And then spending years trying to get good at it.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, people do seem to kind of treat it like they kind of dip in and out of it. Uh,
Right. And
yeah.
there was a period of time when I was getting my MFA where I was sort of like I felt like I was being pressured to go more the free verse route.
Mhm.
But my mom was the one who was like, no, stick with form. And I'm
Oh
glad I
yeah.
did. Yeah.
What's her? Is she a writer? Is she a literary person?
She is a lawyer, but she was an
Oh,
English major. So she's
okay.
also like one of my biggest fans, which is very cool. She's read my book like 100 times, I
It's,
think.
I mean, that is wonderful. It would also be like more depressing if she was like, Alexis is okay. Like if you were like not on her top 10 list of poets,
Well,
that would be,
I know a very successful poet who said that her mom doesn't read her book because reading gives her a headache, which I thought was hilarious.
in a way, like it's better if your mom doesn't read any poetry than if she reads poetry but doesn't care for your poetry. Like
Exactly.
that would be tough. But yeah, but so she encouraged you to stick with form. What was her? Did she give you an argument, or did she have like where did that come from?
I think she said basically that form is where I excel and I shouldn't, and it's also what I like to do. So I shouldn't let,
Yeah, yeah,
any voices or outside
yeah,
people
yeah, yeah,
kind of like talk me out of it. But I was thinking about how form, kind of like anything else in life, like there are poetic trends, like things going in
yeah.
and out of style, which I'd never really thought of before.
What have so beyond just hearing more people say like, oh, I'm a formalist, or and you're now hearing people actually like claim that term.
Hmm. Yeah.
That's wild because that has been so uncool.
Hmm.
Uh, but all right, I mean, I'll take it, I guess. I
Yeah,
don't.
these
Yeah, I
young
don't know.
people, young people
So,
are crazy.
what other trend do you observe in form in poetry, or do you like, or is that do you mean it even that on even that small a scale? Like, are there things you see coming in and out?
Yeah, people are gonna kill me for saying this, but I think the word sonnet is used really loosely now. I think any poem that has any kind of turn or is like roughly 14 lines is called a sonnet. Have you noticed this?
I know. Well, I know there was a book that won the was it the Pulitzer or the National Book Award that was a book of sonnets, but they were all free verse, right? They were just 14-line
Yeah.
poems, or were they even? I think they were 14 lines, right?
Yeah.
It was a guy's name was the Frank, right?
Yeah.
From
Yeah.
Diane Seuss. Yeah.
And I
Yes.
also
Yeah.
noticed that everyone wants to write about cicadas. There's always a cicada in the poem. I've never even seen a cicada in real life. Have
Oh
you?
man. I have seen a cicada, but I certainly have not like observed one frequently in the wild. Like it's not. Yeah, I don't. You hear them more than you see them, but they also are. I mean, I there's like nonstop bug sounds outside, and I certainly muddle them all up. I know A. Stallings yelled at me once for like confusing cicadas with katydids, which I,
Oh my God, you're
which I,
so uncultured for doing
I'm
that. Wow.
terrible. Yeah, and the problem is like if I had a different area where I was better able to make those kind of distinctions, I would feel like I had some compensation for it. I do remember like it seems like the when I was in college and grad school, there was a real fever for the words scrim and arabesque, but never used literally. Like never, ever, ever used to describe a scrim or an like to refer to an actual scrim or an actual arabesque. It drove me
Wow.
crazy. But yeah, like every poem included those. And I do, yeah, I think you're right. Like there are certain words that come in and out of fashion. Do you notice I do. I mean, is it like are Sestinas now in a like a perverse way becoming cool? Like I do. I feel like I see like Taylor Bias just like cranks them out like just on her coffee break.
Yeah, well, I'm right now editor at large of Northwest Review, and
Okay.
we're getting so many Sestina submissions. And
Oh,
what's crazy is that they're pretty good.
all right. Okay. So it's
Yeah,
Sestina Renaissance. Do
I
you
guess
feel
so.
the same? Like there's certain forms where I I see them on the page and I think, I mean, the honest truth is like the shorter it is, the better. But like, there's certainly like prose poems and sestinas. As soon as I recognize that that's what I'm looking at, part of my heart sinks.
No,
So
I
I'm like,
agree.
oh man, all right, this is good. Just because I don't know, with the sestina, even though they're not that long, I just feel like there's a certain kind of labor I have to go through to like keep everything straight somehow.
I completely agree. I never used to like reading sestinas. I liked
Yeah.
there was one, The Painter by Ashbery that I thought was cool, but a bunch of other
Oh,
ones I would just be like, "Oh, I guess Elizabeth Bishop has one I
she has the
like."
yeah, the grandmother and
Yeah.
yeah.
But some of them I was just like, "This feels like a chore." Like,
Yeah, they really
yeah.
do. Yeah, and they also, I think, like it's just you have to choose your subject so carefully because you just can't make any progress. And then, like, if in case anybody doesn't know, Sistine is a particular. It's six line stanzas and a 3 line envoy, and the whole poem doesn't involve rhymes, but you only have the same 6 end words for the whole poem. So you keep coming back to the same things over and over again, and that like when people are not careful about choosing a subject that requires that kind of repetition, that's when you start to feel like you're going insane, or you're like, I think part of it is also like I frequently have the problem of accidentally reading the same line twice or having to go back and
Oh, yeah,
reread.
yeah,
And so
yeah.
then like a sestina makes me feel like that.
Mhm.
Like reading a sestina is like reading deja vu. It's like
Yeah.
experiencing deja vu while reading, which then
That's how I feel about pantoums. I become so like
oh
hyper
man,
aware of what I'm reading. I'm just like, "Oh my God,
it's too much repetition. It's
too
too
much."
much. That's why I love Greg's because it's so short.
Mhm.
It's like that's the right amount. That you're
Yeah.
like eight lines is plenty, but like hearing the whole, it's like if what's the little tiny form that the 8 line I can never remember it because I always want to call it the wrong thing. I want to say a tritina, but a tritina is something else. David Yazzie has a tritina. Um,
Gosh, I need to get back into form. What is a tratina?
Tritina is a weird one. I didn't love the pattern. Like I see when I saw the pattern explained, I didn't. So a tritina is 10 lines. There are 3 tercets in a concluding line. The 3 words that end each of the lines of the first stanza are repeated in a different order at the end of the lines, blah, 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 blah. The repeated words are unrhymed. In the closing line, all 3 words are used. I mean, I'll have to look at an example here. Let me find an example of one because otherwise it's going to be impossible to get it in your head. My suspicion is that poetrysoup.com may not serve up like a brilliant example, but we'll see. All right. This is by Milani Udeta. To them, we're the classless aliens. We destroy everything they envy. Toxic, leaving scars on the planet. Grammar problems here. Rare jewel, this ocean filled planet. It cannot be mined by aliens. Natural riches leave such envy. 1 in a million sparks envy, and eyes not on this regal planet. A work in progress to aliens. All aliens envy our planet. All right. So, setting aside our feelings about that poem, I'm unfairly picking on Milani Udeta, who just has this poem up on this little website. But like, I think it's sort of like a micro. It's a micro sestina, but it feels to me like it's too much repetition too quickly. But there's the fuck, what is the I'm gonna lose my mind if I don't figure this is like gonna completely derail the whole conversation trying to find out what this thing is because I've actually written these and I can't remember the all right. I'm gonna find it and I'm gonna put it in the beginning of this episode because otherwise I'll kill myself. But yeah,
Yeah,
it's
we have
a
to figure
I'll
this
send
out.
it to you. Yeah. It is a cool form, but it's like you have enough air to breathe in it. Like there's enough non-repetition in it that you don't it doesn't turn into a wine bottle on your
Right.
yeah. But so you said you've got to get back into form. I saw like the most recent thing it looked like you published was like a long it looked like it was blank verse just on like
Yeah.
one reading. Yeah. The heartbreaker
Yeah. That
yeah
was
poem.
blank
Yeah.
verse. I feel like blank verse, so easy, love it, but I've like forgotten how to rhyme almost.
Yeah. Have you been mostly doing blank verse?
Yeah. I think the last quote rhyming poem I wrote was a guzzle almost a year ago, and I don't even think that
That
counts.
was for the Uvalde shooting, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, guzzle is all because it's monoryme. It's like you do have to rhyme a lot. Though,
Mhm.
though I do for some reason like I'm not a huge fan of guzzles, and like there are some good ones, and I thought that one actually did quite a nice job. But like it does seem to me if you're gonna bother to write a guzzle, you gotta rhyme it. And so like
Yeah.
it became so fashionable for a while, but a lot of people were just writing like blank guzzles, and to me that just seems like what are you doing? Like you just want to
Yeah,
write
that's
your name in
pointless
it. Just
almost.
fucking
Yeah.
yeah. You want to write a poem with your name in it and with guzzle in the title. And that like that's the only reason you're doing this form.
Exactly. Exactly. Because then that like it takes no effort whatsoever, really. I mean, the whole point of the guzzle is the rhyming.
Yeah, and it gets harder and harder. Which
Yeah.
I remember hearing when I was first learning about those, that like they're traditionally they were often like in improvised contests. Like they were almost like battle raps where you would basically, it was like skulltonics. Like you try to keep it going. Like part of the
Oh,
challenge
that
was
is
like to
so
see if you
cool.
could come up with another couplet, or not couplet, but another stanza off the top of your head. And then, which I guess meant that you had to like, when you knew you were done, you always had to get to like, all right, I'm going to tell you I'm done by saying my name in this one.
Oh, I
Right.
like
Because
that.
that's
That's
like,
that's brilliant. Yeah.
yeah. And I mean, apparently they were often like people would pair off and it would be sort of like a combative or competitive thing.
Ooh. That is the
Um,
coolest thing I've ever heard. That reminds me, this is not an irrelevant story, but there's this thing going on where when I meet guys and I tell them I'm a poet, they try to write me a poem, which doesn't make any
what?
sense. It makes no sense. But this one guy, he texted me and it said, Alexis, you may not expect this, but I did just text this. And I was like rolling my eyes until my friend pointed out, like, no, that's kind of a guzzle.
I mean, it's funny because it's like it's both touching. It's like that's one where like the context can tell you everything. Like depending
Mhm.
on who it is who's bothering to take the trouble to do that. And I also like part of me feels like if I like thank God I'm not dating anymore. Like if I went on a date and a woman told me that she was an artist, like I can draw a little. Like when I'm drawing with my daughters, like I can kind of like they'll be like, oh, that looks pretty good, daddy. Like a compliment that ends with daddy is like a very like contextualized compliment.
Mhm.
But like I don't think I would then say like, oh, you're an artist who spent like years like developing this craft. I'm going to respond by amateurishly sending you my own spontaneous work that I spent 30 minutes on. Like that seems like,
Exactly.
is that like a version of a dick pic? Like is that a way of like it's like spontaneous vulnerability? Like is it, I don't know. Like
I don't know either, but that's exactly my qualms with it too. It's like if I tell you that I've, written a book and put all this effort in and you respond like, "Oh, I'm going to write a poem on the spot," and then act as if it's the same thing. Like that just seems weird to me. It's almost like, "Oh, I'm afraid to let you have this thing and be the center of attention,
yeah.
so I also do this thing."
There was some story, I don't know how real this is, but there was some story about Elliot and Frost being at some event and people were trying to prevail upon them to get them to read. And Elliot finally said, like, well, I'll read, but only if Bob reads as well.
Hmm.
And Frost said, well, while you're reading, I'll compose one. How about that? Which is like,
Oh
oh,
my
you dick.
God.
Like, come, like, first of all,
Oh
listen
my
to the poem.
God.
And second, like, really? Like you have to do that. But at least it was Frost. Like at least you were getting shown up by a legend. Yeah, I think there is something. Is that it is like does the one-upsmanship of that gesture jive with the rest of your interaction with most of these guys?
I don't know. That's a good question. As soon as I get the poem, I decide I'm not interested and, move on. I'm like, okay, well, gonna go get a coffee now because that didn't work.
Which in a way it is like a dick pic. It's like just to let you know, right? Like here's an out, like a right
Mhm.
away. If you can like you can immediately learn if you have no further interest.
Right, it's great if you put it that way.
Yeah,
Like, why waste time, and then 6 months down the line, this guy is like cranking out poems in 2.5 minutes. And I'm like, oh my gosh, why did I get involved in this?
yeah.
That's great. Yeah, weed them out, weed out the weirdos.
When do you tell a guy that you're a poet?
Usually at like the first meeting, whenever someone
Okay.
asks. 'Cause I
Is that your version of that? Is that your version of like here's some like how do you frame it or how is it received? Do you think?
Well, because usually people will ask, like, oh, what do you do?
Oh
And
yeah, yeah,
yeah, so then I'll say, like, oh, I do this to pay the bills, but really I care about this kind of thing. I saw that advice on Instagram from like another poet who was
yeah.
basically saying that like she doesn't particularly like her day job, but it's not who she is. Poetry is who she is. So it's like, cool, okay. I like that.
That is really like because it's one of the worst tropes of American small talk is that our everybody's immediate go-to question is what do you
Hmm.
do? Which
Hmm.
means what do you do for money, which is almost always a shitty question.
Yeah.
But I'm actually really like I'm impressed that you have like you have good reason. Like you actually have like the ballast behind your response. But like I'm impressed with your poise in saying like, oh, here's what I care about.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's I like doing that because like if I say, "Oh, I'm a teacher," I immediately get a bunch of questions about lesson plans and did you
Oh
get your
God.
master's in education? I'm like, "No." No. Like, no.
Is well since you mentioned that, is there any is there because I know last time we spoke, you had some I'll put it in gentle terms, but like you had some qualms or some there was some friction with your previous
Oh my
teaching
God, that was
situation.
insane. That was utterly insane. I don't know what became of that school. I got some phone calls from some of my allies at the last school, but I was like, I don't even want to know. Like, I'm out of there. Think about teaching these days, and this is going to sound like an old person boomer thing to say, but it's true, is that we have gone so far in this one direction where we let kids basically like run the show.
Oh
And whether
yeah.
it's a rich school or like an impoverished school, it's the same thing. Like a kid can basically say, "Oh, this teacher was mean," and then, bam, like
Oh God.
it's really interesting. And I've had this conversation with a lot of other teachers who feel the same. Like, should we
Mm.
be, hitting kids with a ruler like they did in in the old days? No. But let's just be normal.
So yeah, I read this thing. Now that we've transitioned this into like a dark web conservative podcast. I read this thing in Nietzsche where he said it's a sign of it's a warning sign when a culture when like the default in a culture is to disparage old things. Like,
Hmm.
which is not to say like clearly lots of things in the old things are bad, but if all things being equal, he says like it tends to be a sign of good health in a culture if there is a bias toward honoring or at least like paying attention to a person who is old, a thing that is old, a way of doing things that is old. If if like every interaction, the bias is, oh, let's discard the old and replace it with something new, like that's a sign of trouble in a culture. And it does like, I hadn't thought of it in those terms, but I think I don't know. Like, I wonder, it's because it seems like depending on who you ask, you would get very different answers. Like some people would say like, oh, well, we have such a stodgy culture, even talking to my dad, and partly like I think he lives in like a slightly more conservative milieu, but like even his perspective is that the culture is much more conservative. Whereas I think at least around, I live in like this dark blue bubble, and it feels like we're almost always eager to discard the old and replace it with the new, and that allows for a lot of renewal. It allows for a lot of freshness and innovation, but it also seems like that may bode ill in the long term.
That's a really interesting way of putting it because even if you just like look around at America right now, like we're falling apart. I mean, even just like the whole gun control debate,
Yeah,
people saying, "Oh, well, a zillion years ago, these old guys said that we should have guns. So let's just honor that tradition." Whereas like normal
yeah.
people are saying, "No."
I actually had an off mic exchange with a like a very accomplished younger formalist recently who said like he had some irritation at the first wave of new formalists for being too newfangled. He was
Mm.
like they were apologizing too much for form. Like they didn't like embrace or exploit form sufficiently. It was like it's up to us to like find out more of what it can do rather than I feel that way reading, again, like I'm gonna fuck up your life because you actually know this is like every time I do a like I go on a rant, Shane will write me and be like, yes, but I also know him personally and he's a really nice guy. God damn it. But like this is how I feel when I read Dana Joya. Like brilliant guy, can't scan a line. If you're
Mhm.
like, this is not blank verse. What is this? So are you an old fogey or are you
I absolutely am an old fogey because I mean,
you're
the
a young
whole
fogey?
point,
Yeah,
young folky.
yeah.
Think about form to me is like if you're gonna take too many liberties with it, what's the point? Like I saw this weird thing on Twitter from someone who was saying, oh, can somebody provide any examples of iambic pentameter poems? And then in parentheses it said 10 syllables. And then just like Twitter blew up. Like all the
Right.
formalists were like, no, that's not what pentameter is. It's not about syllables. It's about,
Right.
stresses and iambs.
Yeah.
But then this person responds and says, no, I'm a formalist and I've studied with renowned formalists and this is how it is, which I just found so weird.
I mean, which it's like either that's a troll or like, well, let's talk about which formalists are those. Like that was I can't remember if I mentioned this on an episode recently, but like this is my feeling whenever I read a book about like where like writers are telling you about how this or that is good for your writing. Like my first question is always like table of contents. Like who is telling me this? Like
Yeah.
which authorities are you drawing on? Because like if your writing sucks, then like I don't trust your opinion on this.
Yeah, yeah. Like I got into some argument a million years ago with this man who was insisting that prose poetry doesn't exist. There's either prose or there's poetry. And if you refer to anything as a prose poem, you're an ignoramus and this and that.
Yeah.
And I was just like, you're wrong. But then if you, look for him online in his publications, like there are none, so like like you're saying, just take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
Consider the source, as they say.
Yeah. I definitely need to get you to yell at Elijah because he goes further. He says he calls free verse poetry in prose. He's like free verse poetry is a contradiction in terms. I refuse to use that term.
My
So
God.
yeah,
What do you think
there's
of that?
I think I mean as with so many of these terms, I think like well there are ways like I have to think of language descriptively. Like I have my I am a stick in the mud in some ways. Like there was something Joanna was saying oh like parody because I had a complaint about the use of the word satire like the incorrect use of the word satire and then I mentioned to her in conversation it was like oh well people use parody and satire as if they're synonyms and she said like oh well I use them as if they're synonyms like god damn it like the
They're
I mean
so
it,
different.
right and it's like it's not like all would be lost if we collapse those meanings but like there is a fine distinction to have and when you lose that you've lost something and so yeah like I think though when it comes to things like using the term formalist, which lots of people object to, or a term like free verse, like we need a like if you have a better way to refer to that thing, tell me. Because then I'll use that other better way. But like we're like verse paragraphs, which like I hate that term to refer to like a chunk that has a white space on either end, but is not in a regular stanzaic pattern, so can't be called a stanza. I don't know another term for that. So I say verse paragraph, even if I have to cringe saying it, because what else am I going to say? Like, I'm going
This
to
is
go
my
through
first
more
time
effort to
hearing
talk around
verse
it.
paragraph.
Sorry? Oh, this is the
Did you
first time
say
you've heard
verse
it?
paragraph? I've never heard of this.
So what do you call when you have like I mean, it could be a free verse poem, or if it could even be like one of like Yeats's is his. I want to say his Kon Markovich and Eva Gorbuth is like this, where it's written in ABBA rhyming like the rhyme scheme is ABBA but shit but the I just found this like special issue of or not special issue but like selection of West Branch from like a year or
Oh.
so ago that's selected by Shane McRae and it's the selections are from Jory Graham you
Mm-hmm.
Cole Swenson and Jay Wright. And I was like, oh shit, like I want to do a whole episode about this. So like I was gonna ask you about it, and then it was like, no, I just want to do a whole episode on that. So but yeah, that was what came up just now. But let me I know the poem, but I can't remember how it's broken up on the page. I want to say it's I don't know if you know this poem. It's like one of my very favorite. It was like one of the one of the moments like Joanne and I really like connected was like, oh, we both had the same Yeats favorite Yeats poem. It was like recently
Oh.
she like I made fun of her by calling her Aphrodite and she said I said like, well, there's only one of the gods I've ever related to. And she's like, oh, Hephaestus. I was like, oh, you know me.
That's so
Um,
cool.
but yeah, okay. So it's written in ABBA rhyme scheme, but it's broken into two chunks that are irregular in length and even, I think, no, never mind. I was gonna say they don't break. I thought they broke against the rhyme scheme, but they don't. But yeah, they're two irregular chunks of shaggy. I can't show it to you because I'm not holding it up. But like a poem either in free verse or not, where there are chunks of lines with white space on either side, but they're not the same number of lines. What do you call those?
I mean, is that different from a stanza?
Well, a stanza. I mean, just a stanza typically is a unit of lines that is repeated regularly and that is of a certain has a certain uniform shape
Oh,
metrically and often in typically like sapphics are stanzaic right
okay.
like Horace's odes like one of the definitions of if a Horatian ode typically is written in regular stanzas I think like there's certain traditions like sestets where shifting rhyme schemes are part of the convention, but typically like that's a stanza. And so again, like it's not that there's that much that's lost, but there is like some distinction there.
That's super
Um,
interesting. And now it's making me wonder if I have verse paragraphs in this book and now I'm like flipping through the
Oh,
PDF.
you're like your blank verse poem that I just read, the Heartbreakers, what's it
Oh
called?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Ode to the Heartbreakers. I guess that's
Yeah.
those would be verse paragraphs, right?
Yeah,
Because
those are verse paragraphs. Yeah, I should have said like actually blank verse poems are the best like, usual
okay.
example because like they're written like and they're it's partly like they're organized a little bit like a paragraph, whereas
Hmm.
stanzas are so metrically regulated that they are, like Yeats says that the stanza should coincide with the sentence, but often that's not the case and it doesn't need to be the case. Whereas verse paragraphs, seldom will you break one in the middle of a sentence, right?
So about Yates, I think
Yeah.
he is so cool, but has anything bad popped up about him? Like
Oh,
like this whole thing, the Larkin
Alexis.
racist.
Oh,
What have
Alexis.
I
He
missed
was
about
like,
Yates?
he's like a fascist. I mean, he was terrible. He was like buddies with Aleister Crowley, the wickedest man in England, and he was also like that's what I was thinking. Listening to C.A. Conrad and Hoa and Wen, or sorry, listening to Anonymous and Anonymous poets. Like this morning, I thought like I can't fucking believe these people talking about vibrations and crystals, but also like when he was not writing poems, this is totally how Yeats talks. Like he was fucking bananas. I mean, he thought like aliens were giving him secret instructions. So yeah, like Yeats is definitely
Or it's
yeah,
great that he's
yeah.
not alive right now, pulling like a
Yes.
Kanye West situation
Oh
and then we
God.
have to like,
Yeah.
like you said, like do we have to be guilty about reading, his poems? Like there's
Yeah,
the
yeah,
whole
yeah.
art versus artist thing. The only one who seems like a super cool dude was Franz Wright. I was reading about him recently and now he would like volunteer with grieving kids. That's so
Yes. He was a he did really good things.
but he was
He
bad too.
was well, I don't know. I know. I certainly don't want to say he was like bad or should be canceled or was a I don't think he is what we would call problematic in any meaningful sense. Granted, I also only met him when he was pretty well dying, but
Mm.
he was one of the most unpleasant people I've ever met in my life. Like he was so partly he was like crackling with anger. Like, he was so bitter. Just like couldn't be more just like vibrating with rage
Oh
as he
my
would.
God.
I mean, things got better when he would like perk up and just like talk about Dante or something. But even a little, I said something about a translation, and he was like, "What are you talking about?" It was like it didn't take much. He was just like he was just so. I,
Oh,
mean, I think he had just like he'd had like a hard ride, and he was also a recovering, heroin addict, and so like it can, it's like I don't feel great if I don't get coffee in the morning. I
where did
imagine.
you meet him?
So he gave a reading at Catholic University when I was there. He was friends with Ryan. Uh,
That's unexpected.
well, I think he's like again, like Alice, the thing she said on her podcast recently about how like maybe the quality that most connects poets across experiences and personalities is a tendency toward obsessiveness. Um,
Mm.
and I think that certainly was the case with him. That he and Ryan both like they were obsessive on the same wave. I mean, Ryan is still like alive and well and fine and is like a lovely, charming man. But like their obsessiveness sort of was complementary or was harmonic.
Do you know how terrible it is to meet some poets in person? Like poets whose work you admire? Usually for me, it's
Oh, and
gone.
I really liked his work when I
But
like yeah.
yeah, but like that's what I mean. Like if you like this person's work and then you meet them in real life, like there's a poet who comes to mind right now who came to do a reading at Wisconsin,
Yeah.
and he was just so weird. He goes up there and he read one poem for 30 minutes. It was like an
Oh
epic.
no,
And then
no,
at the end,
don't do that at a
I know, and it
reading.
gets worse. And then at the end he goes, "Gosh, that was amazing, right? I'm amazing. Can I just get a round of applause? I can't believe I just did that."
But was it a bit? Because that
No,
could be a funny bit if you did. Like I could imagine like Bill Murray doing that, and it would be
right.
hilarious, right? But it was not a bit.
No. Not a satire, not a parody, not a bit, nothing.
Was it good, or was it like? I mean, I just like long poems at a reading. Like I have a real hard time
Yeah.
following anything that gets longer than I have like a certain unit I'm like one of those old tape record answering machine tape
Mm-hmm.
recorders. Like I only have a certain length of sound I can process at a time. And if you go past that, it just like it all goes to gobbledygook.
Yeah, I agree. Long poems that are reading are a no. This was not very good. And I have this theory that should be common sense, but apparently it's not. If you have to tell people that something you did is good, how good is it? Like my mom and I have this conversation all the
Yeah.
time because there's this girl I follow on Instagram, also a poet, who will do things like post pictures of her bank account and be like, anyone who says poets don't make money, look at my bank account. Like, look how great I am.
What?
It's like, this is
Just your
absurd.
bank
Like,
account?
yeah. Or like a selfie that says like, oh, look how hot poets are. Look how I turn heads every time I go outside. It's like if you have to tell people that you're beautiful or that your poems are good, like,
Is it again like I can't I had like my immediate thought is like this is a joke, but I guess
right. I
I'm out
always
of step.
assume it's like tongue in cheek, but nowadays it hardly ever is.
So like there was plenty of response to this thing about Elizabeth Holmes recently that she got a profile in the New York Times and she's going to prison and she started this company when she was 19 and fooled a bunch of famous
Mm-hmm.
old men. And I was just thinking about like she was 19 when she started Theranos, and it was horseshit. Like she had like a little bit. She like dropped out of college. She had like a little bit of medical knowledge, and she basically like learned a spiel for seeming like a tech genius entrepreneur. And like her script basically was like fake it till you make it and seem really authoritative and surround yourself with an aura of mystery and
Mm-hmm.
authority. And like that is a formula that just does work for a lot of people. And
Yeah.
if she had not happened to pick a task that was physically impossible, then she might just continue to go be a success the way lots of other because like Steve Jobs was not all that different. He just picked things that it turned out he was able to bully his engineers into doing if he like bullied them hard enough and had the right timing. I was just thinking about like Cameron, who is a kid who's on the show frequently. He's going to hate that I called him a kid, but he's 19. He's 19, and I was thinking like, what if Cameron were a poetry fraud? Like he's very smart and he's read a bunch of shit and he like knows poetry very well and is like very thoughtful. And I disagree with him plenty, but like it would be there's no fraudulence to be had there. Like how could he be like it's not like he can't be faking anything, right? Because
Right.
you can't, like it's not like he's promising something that then he will eventually have to deliver. You can just hear it when he talks about it. But I do think like I have always had an insufficient admiration for the power of suggestion. And like
Mhm.
it's true even with artists now that like so much of convincing people that you're good does seem to be telling them that you're good. And as much as like you or I might look at that and say, well, that's ridiculous. Like just show me the work and I will get like I'll know for myself. That doesn't seem to be how reputations are made.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. And in the poetry world, that's a really good point. I mean, look at all these Instagram poets who are total frauds. But they just kind of have this whole like not even just like fake it till you make it, but just like fake it entirely, try to fool people. And it works.
I guess the best thing of all is to be because what's true is also like if you I think like I've always surrounded myself with depressives. And so my assumption is always like the lingua franca of poets is self-deprecation. Like the way one talks to other is like through like denial of one's own value. But I think like people unfortunately people also believe that,
Yeah.
right? And so like it seems like the best combination is to be good and also like have a healthy sense of your own self-worth, which
Right.
actually like as acerbic as you could be like you seemed sort of to find that balance like you seem to sort of have like you are actually good at writing and you seem to be I will at least say you're like better adjusted than the average poet like like I don't
And
know
I
like beyond that I
feel
don't
well.
know but like you seem like above average for poets on that score.
I remember you said that at when we went back to Hopkins for the alumni reading
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
having dinner at Tamber's. You said something along those lines. I thought it was brilliant, but it was something almost like you seem really well adjusted or
Yeah.
something. I was just shocked.
Well I mean yeah again like it might be that for like that's not like for the average stockbroker, you have low self-esteem, but like for the average poet, you're doing
Right.
great. I don't like, yeah.
Yeah.
For the average lacrosse player at a New England prep school, you're
Oh my
down in the
God.
dumps. But yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. An average, just like mediocre rich guy. They have all the self-esteem in the world.
and it does seem to be like there's the like the Dunning Krieger idea was that that self assessment is inversely correlated to competence.
Hmm.
So it actually like it's not just that they're rich or have had things easy. It's like it's actually the mediocrity that helps them feel good about themselves.
Oh,
Right. Like the better you are, the more aware you are of your own limitations, the better like the more knowledgeable like because like I have a really wonderful general practitioner here and I have like a shit ton of health problems. So it's good that she's good, but like she's extremely cautious and humble about her own opinions.
hmm.
Like it's partly because she has enough perspective and experience to know how complicated biology is and how
Right.
complicated medicine is, and so she's willing to say like, oh well, it's worth considering some different possibilities here. But it's if she were dumber, she would be more certain of herself.
Yeah, yeah. I remember Richie Hoffman saying something my first semester at Hopkins when I first met him. He said to the class, like, if you sit around and wonder if you're dumb or incompetent, you're not, because dumb people do not know that they're dumb. And it's like, you know what? That's kind of fair. I mean, a
No,
lot of people who are sort of incompetent or happy-go-lucky just kind of bounce through life thinking they're great. And that might be really fun, you know?
probably is really fun. It's funny, like you think about different sorts of experiences people like either like through VR or through like that is an experience I actually would at some point. Like if I could temporarily have an experience, I wouldn't like, I don't know that I would, I think I might choose something as simple as that. Like
Hmm.
if I could for a day or a week be someone who just thought like I am enough. I'm great. Yeah,
Hmm.
like especially undeservedly, but like really, really just felt no doubt whatsoever. I think I would at least like to see what that's like.
I got a review of my book that was so mean. It was the only mean review I've ever gotten, and
Oh,
it was
was
so
it?
mean. It was
Oh,
so mean that they didn't tell me about it.
because you got a bunch. Yeah, I was gonna say you got a bunch of really good reviews.
This review, Stephen Campa, if you're listening to this, I
Did
challenge
Stephen
you.
Campa
Stephen Campa.
trash your book? Oh
Oh
no!
my God. He
Oh
said I was like
wow,
relentlessly self-obsessed. I couldn't believe it. It he
Stephen.
wasn't even trashing the book. He was like trashing me in this
What
8-page manifesto.
was it in response to someone else's review?
No, it was like a weird sort of bait and switch because Adam Vines from Birmingham Poetry Review said, "Hey, I just read your book. I love it. Donald Justice would be so honored, blah, blah,
Yeah,
blah."
yeah, yeah.
He said Stephen Campa's going to review it and I'm sure he'll love it too. That's not exactly how it went. It was really it was so weird because the second page was like a list of all the times I've complimented myself in the book.
What a
I
weird.
was so perplexed.
That's wild. I gotta ask him about that because I mean the thing is like I really like. I mean I know him personally. Like I like his poetry and he writes really good criticism sometimes. But like that's what must have happened is like Adam Vines liked your book. He like sent it to Steven and it wasn't Steven's cup of tea. But then like the correct response to that is like, well, I'll just like I'll pass on this one. Like I'm not going
Right.
to review this, right? If it's not for me, I'm not going to review it. I mean, the time to review a book like that, I think, is like if this were your seventh book and you'd
Right.
won a Pulitzer, then it's like, all
Right.
right, like it's like let's cut this person down to size. But like with a first book, and it's
Yeah.
just like, oh, it didn't like I didn't care for it. Like, why would you review a first book badly that you this wasn't for you?
Yeah, that's exactly what I've been saying too.
That's
Like
wild.
a young person writing her first book, like what was the
Like
purpose of
William Logan doesn't do that. He doesn't trash
right?
first books.
Right. Doesn't he have like an I don't review first books policy?
Well, he does review them, but he only rarely and only when he really likes them, or at least when he thinks like there's something really promising. Like he will not review a first book just to trash it. He will
Yeah.
review it to say like, oh, this is someone to watch.
Yeah, and this was just, utter trashing. It's really funny. Greg Williamson was the one who told me about it, and he emailed me and said, "Oh, Stephen Campa wrote you a mixed review." I'm like, "Mixed?" Like after I read it, I'm like, "What is this mixed with?" Um, the last paragraph said something, it was going on again about how I only talk about myself, and it said, every time it was like when I listen to Beethoven, I know what it's like to be the universe. And when I listen to Mozart, I know what it's like to be human. And when I read the poetry of Alexis Sears, I know what it's like to be Alexis Sears. But I don't care. And I want to know, like, I want to know what it's like to be the universe. And I was like,
You,
what?
miss, are neither Beethoven nor Mozart, since you're also a classical composer.
Yeah.
Oh,
Oh,
Stephen, boy, that's,
Steven.
I mean, in a way, like you, because you've had such a positive response to this book, like I feel like, like what's and I've heard this a number of times and I still don't know how true it is, but I have heard that one of the like fundamental principles of perfumery is that you include a tiny, tiny bit of shit.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like if you're gonna have like a really universally beloved book, you almost want a little bit of shit in the mix just to keep it tart, keep it interesting, you know?
Yeah, I agree with that. I was reading something similar and it was about I think it was about like beauty or something and it was saying that people who are more like controversial or like polarizing
Mm-hmm.
actually are more appealing than people who are just like universally liked.
Yeah. Oh, certainly with like fashion models, that's often. I
Yeah.
mean, like they definitely want like skinny people. There's certain things that are uniform, but they often like when it gets down to like facial structure, they want something a little weird.
Hmm.
And that's the is it Herrick who has the sweet disorder in the dress?
Yeah.
Yeah, because like my friend he now works at Givenchy and he was like a textiles fashion guy in college and he were like one of the first things he taught me was like, well, you don't want to do everything right. Like if
Right.
you're really dressing to be seen, you've got to at least one element has to be a little off.
Yeah, and even rappers talk about that all the time, right? About how you need like a hater or two.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It
And
means you're doing
yeah,
something
you
that's
want to
getting a
have you want to
reaction.
have some quality or characteristic that's a little bit like that would be in a way you don't want to be bulletproof. Like you want to be you even see that with like I don't know enough rap, but I think like it was part of the strength of Outcast in a way that like in a
Mhm.
different context, like Andre would have been a clown.
Right.
He's sort of like yes, I'm going to wear a kilt, and yet like you want to sort of find a weird quirk. Like you want to have like two big ears or have something that would be off.
Right. Like I'm sure there were people who thought David from Talking Heads was super weird when he showed up in that massive suit.
He might not have had just one weird thing, but yeah. But in
Yeah,
a way, like he was wearing a
several.
suit. Like it's like he was doing the old Beatles thing where you wear a suit. It was just like it was everything else was like the size of it, the proportions, the his whole persona,
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Just like you don't want to just be like if everything is too weird, it's uh,
Yeah.
a sour disorder in the dress. You want a little,
Right.
you want something funny. Well,
Yeah,
so
and it's
since
a
we,
tricky balance because you don't want to be so weird that it seems like a gimmick or like insincere, but you
no, right, because you want the
want,
note of
yeah,
authenticity too.
exactly.
Yeah, which I have tried to convey. I've definitely gotten myself in trouble by like either giving advice or by like being asked to speak at things. And then the thing I always try to convey is like, if you really want to praise someone and have it land, you have to salt it a little bit. Like you
Hmm.
have to, like at a family event or like, if you don't have a little bit of salt in the caramel, if you don't have a little note of criticism or insult, then it won't stick the same way. If it's
Right.
all just effort, like frictionless praise, then it'll just slide right off, and you won't remember it. It won't be moving at all.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think that's a really good point. You don't want things to just be so sweet and generic, like over and over and over. I love that. Like salt in the
Yeah,
caramel. That's
yeah.
good.
You've got like if you're going to give a bachelor or a what am I saying? Like a best man speech or like even a
Mhm.
eulogy, like a little. You have to because I remember a one of the I won't say who it was, but like a family event. I have a lot of there are a lot of lawyers in my family on both sides and a lot of talkers, and so I've like listened to a lot of like eulogies people put time into, and I like one of them that was very scrupulously all positive was there was like this really terrible telltale moment in it where it was just sort of like this list of platitudes about how great he was and how everything was fine, even though like there was like real, he was like a great man with like a lot of problems and
Yeah.
some great suffering, and
Mhm.
and the line he meant to close with was he always knew how to uh, take lemons and make lemonade, which is a total cliche, and again, like it would have been like just another line to like roll off and be forgotten. But what he actually said was he always knew how to take lemonade and make lemons. Because he fucked it up. But it was like, oh,
Yeah.
that was the one note that rang weirdly true. Because like
Yeah.
he had a temper. And like it was,
That's really interesting.
yeah. I mean, that was more like the truth sort of slipping out
Yeah, it's sort of like
unbidden.
Freudian. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But yeah, you gotta you want a little. It wasn't. I think originally it wasn't shit. It was ambergris, isn't that? Because ambergris is like it's from like the digestive system, isn't it?
Right. Right.
And it's like it makes perfumes really potent, but on its own, it's not pleasant. Is what I think. It's like on its own, it's too much or something. But we have completely failed to talk about this
Oh,
essay. So
right.
I will say you are maybe the only person who has responded well to my big intimidating list of topics that I send to prospective guests. And twice now you've looked through and you said like, oh, let's talk about this thing on your list. You're probably the wrong person to ask then, but like most people either ignore it or, which is fine if they want to talk about something else, or like I send them the list and then never hear from them again. So like, is there something I should be doing differently, or like you're like, unfortunately, like it worked perfectly on you. So I don't know if like if you can give
So,
me advice on.
wait, this is weird actually. So do some of them respond and say, no, I would rather talk about like insert other thing here? Or are they just like, no?
Well, some people say something else, which is fine because I also say like, oh, if there's something else in your mind, let me know. This is just like a list to get you started on some ideas. But then other people, it seems to be like they're just totally put off by it, or I feel like it becomes like inadvertently like I've given them a homework assignment.
Oh,
Because I always say like don't feel obliged even to look at this, but like if you want to think of
right.
some ideas, I think I also just like I never want to just do a tell me about your book and your childhood interview. And so
Right.
I think like that's, I want to like find something to dig our claws into.
Yeah, I think this
Yeah.
format is great.
All right. Well, it worked for you. So what really needs it is all of my prospective guests need to be more like Alexis Sears.
I know.
That's what I
Everyone, if
think.
you're listening to this, just be more like me.
That was this week's show. Thank you again to Alexis Sears. She's the author of Out of Order. Check the show notes for links to all of that. You can reach me, as always, at SLEERICKETS@gmail.com. And with any luck, I will be speaking to you again very soon. Until then.